told me that her husband was beating her and that she was afraid for her life.
19-year-old Erin Corwin was a young, newlywed Marine wife, seemingly living the dream in California's high desert. But hidden behind the idyllic base life was a dark secret, an affair that would turn deadly. When Erin vanished in June 2014, a massive 300-square-mile search began, but the real horror was what investigators found 100 feet down an abandoned mine shaft near Joshua Tree. This is the story of betrayal, lies, and the shocking confession that closed a 2-month nightmare. Erin Renae Heavilin Corwin was born on July 15, 1994, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. She married her high school sweetheart, Corporal Jonathan Corwin, in November 2012, after eloping to Las Vegas shortly after he joined the U.S. Marine Corps. In September 2013, they moved from Tennessee to the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms, California, where Jonathan was stationed. While Jonathan participated in artillery drills that often kept him in the desert for up to a month at a time, Erin was adjusting to base life. Unfortunately, early in the marriage, she suffered a miscarriage, which left her devastated and depressed. As she withdrew from social life, the couple began to drift apart. Eventually, she became close friends with their neighbors, Christopher and Nicole Lee. They frequently hung out together, watching movies and hosting barbecues. Erin and Nicole also volunteered at the same horse ranch. Meanwhile, Erin and Chris became involved in an affair that Jonathan wouldn't learn about until March 2014. After discovering it, Erin promised that the affair was over, and Jonathan began to forgive her and Chris in hopes of repairing his marriage. However, unbeknownst to him, the affair continued. In June 2014, Erin discovered she was pregnant and believed the child was Chris's. Then, on Saturday, June 28, 2014, everything changed. That day, Chris invited Erin to meet up with him because he had a special surprise for her, a hunting trip to celebrate her pregnancy. She agreed, told Jonathan she was going to Joshua Tree National Park to look for hiking trails, kissed him goodbye, told him she loved him, and left at around 7 a.m. After that, he never saw her alive again. Driving her blue Toyota Corolla, she went to a spot known as Condor Gate, not far from the military base. There, Chris picked her up in his Jeep and traveled toward the Rose of Peru mine. Cell phone records showed both phones traveling east from the base between 7 and 8 a.m. The last activity from Erin's phone was at 8:04 a.m. When she failed to show back up the following day, Jonathan reported her missing. On June 30th, 2 days after she was last seen, her car was discovered abandoned 2 miles from the base. Tire tracks were also found and later linked to Chris. By July, investigators had learned about the affair through forensic exams of Erin's phone and computers. This shot Chris to the top of the suspect list, and he was brought in for an interview. Detectives questioned him about his relationship with Erin, but he claimed they were merely acquaintances, not friends, and that he only saw her in passing at their apartment. However, investigators already had proof of the affair obtained from Erin's computer and cell phone, which revealed intimate communications between her and Chris. Plus, the affair wasn't exactly a secret around the base. Chris's wife, Nicole, even found out, and a neighbor of hers overheard her scream, and I quote, "If you ever have anything else to do with my husband, I'll kill you myself." It's assumed she was talking to Erin. When confronted with the evidence, he once again tried to downplay their relationship.
I didn't bring up mine and Erin's thing because it didn't seem pertinent at the time.
Okay.
I confided in her, that I was feeling and she's like, you can't be doing that stuff. It's kind of like she was someone to talk to about stuff that I didn't want to talk to about with my wife. She said her husband was beating her and choking her, and like she was scared for her life. She'd say that he would choke her whenever he would get mad. I just being in the state I was like, okay, well, I can fix this. And then broken pieces fix each other. So we just kind of started developing a bond.
But you told her that you loved her. Did she tell you that she loved you?
She did.
Okay. And how many times did you guys kiss?
4 tops. Maybe some like hands up and down where we're kissing, but nothing real heavy.
Okay.
Nothing under clothes or anything like that.
Okay, so clothes never came off.
And then I told her I'm not going to put Liberty through a broken home. You know, we bounced that kid back and forth.
Would she lie to you about?
She told me that her husband was beating her and that she was afraid for her life.
So no reason at all why she would message people saying that she's planning to meet with you on Saturday?
Like, she very well could have overheard me and Connor talking or me and Skylar talking. I just don't think she ever got over the fact that we had stopped seeing each other. I'm not sure if the individual shot at me or if it was just like recreational shooting, but there was an individual out there with a handgun and it was fired in my general direction. I got kind of lost, and at one point in time I came out, followed Gold Run Road to Old Delmine Road, and then followed that to the road that comes out of National.
When asked about his whereabouts on the day she disappeared, he said he was out hunting wolves in Joshua Tree National Park alone. Investigators wanted to know where exactly he was hunting and why he didn't have any gear with him. They were also suspicious of his story because his phone had pinged in the Old Dale Mining District, located outside the park. He then changed his story and admitted to being at the Rose of Peru mine, and instead of hunting, said he was there looking for discarded tires that he wanted to use for target practice. The Rose of Peru was a gold mine that primarily operated between 1939 and 1941. Investigators were certain Chris had something to do with Erin's disappearance, but without enough evidence, they were forced to release him. A search warrant for Chris's home was then obtained on July 4th, 2014, almost a week after Erin's disappearance. While no evidence related to Erin was located, they did find a homemade potato gun, which they considered to be a destructive device, and arrested him on a weapons charge, but he was released on bail 2 days later. Meanwhile, due to Chris's alleged involvement in Erin's disappearance and presumed murder, the U.S. Marine Corps discharged him. He then quickly moved his family to Alaska while searchers continued desperately trying to find Erin. On August 16, 2014, Erin's body was finally discovered in the Rose of Peru mine shaft. Chris was then arrested for her murder the following day in Anchorage, Alaska. It took a long time to discover her body because the area consisted of more than 1,000 abandoned mine shafts, many of which were unmapped. Plus, the teams were working in sweltering heat, with temperatures climbing as high as 115 degrees at times. The spot where she was ultimately found was 140 feet deep and filled with toxic air. Chris had tried to conceal her body further by throwing tires and debris on top of her. Chris was charged with first-degree murder with the special circumstance of lying in wait, which meant he had intentionally lured Erin into a trap by planning the celebratory trip to the desert. Under California law, this means he would automatically be eligible for life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. They had considered charging him with the murder of the unborn child, but medical examiners couldn't specifically prove she was pregnant because her remains had spent 7 weeks decomposing in the desert heat. For 2 years, Chris maintained his innocence. That is, until October 27, 2016, when he shocked the courtroom during his trial with a surprise confession. He said he had in fact killed Erin on the day she disappeared, but claimed it was because she had confirmed his suspicions while at the mine site that she had been sexually abusing his daughter.
Was saying, and I stopped her again, and I yelled at her this time. I said, "Did you molest my daughter?" And she said, "Yes, and that was the last thing I heard her say."
He claimed Nicole had even noticed suspicious irritation on their daughter's private parts, and they automatically assumed it was Erin. However, there was no medical evidence to back this up. Prosecutors quickly pointed out to him during cross-examination that he continued having an affair with a woman he suspected of abusing his daughter. Plus, the abuse story had not even been mentioned once by him or Nicole in the 2 years leading up to the trial. It was just a sad attempt by a murderer to have his charge reduced from first-degree premeditated murder to voluntary manslaughter done in the heat of the moment. Regardless, he went on to describe strangling Erin to death with a garrote that he just happened to have on hand. He then used the garrote's handles to drag her body to the shaft. He then set the area on fire using a homemade torch that he made from a stick wrapped with a t-shirt. On Thursday, November 3, 2016, the jury found him guilty on all counts, including the lying in wait enhancement, meaning he was automatically getting a life sentence. On Tuesday, November 29, 2016, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his statement to the court, he said he was, and I quote, truly sorry, but then doubled down on his claim that the murder was not premeditated and that he never wanted to kill Erin. The truth is simple. He murdered her because he didn't want his wife, Nicole, to find out that he got another woman pregnant. It's suspected that Nicole was aware of his involvement in Erin's disappearance early on and sought to protect him before he eventually confessed. These suspicions came from comments she allegedly made. She had told the horse ranch owner where she volunteered that authorities would, and I quote, never find the body, and that there would be no case without one. She was also heard berating Chris for not being able to, and I quote, keep his lies straight. Despite all that, she was never charged with a crime. On June 10, 1995, Janie Carver was just finishing up her morning jog and was only half a block from her home when a man walked up to her and shot her in the face at point-blank range. Investigators were at a serious loss as to who would have done this. It was an execution-style murder done in broad daylight by an individual who witnesses described as looking calm and casual as he walked away. The case would then sit unsolved for almost a year. Jane Ann Carver, who everyone called Janie, was born on October 23, 1948, in Wheeling, West Virginia. Later, she and her husband Albert moved to Fountain Valley, California, where they started a family, eventually having 2 sons, Cliff and Justin. Janie worked as a flight attendant for United Airlines and was known for her warm, twinkly personality. In an attempt to locate her killer, investigators looked into all aspects of her life. They learned she had married in 1973, had lived in Fountain Valley for the last 20 years, and was deeply rooted in the local community. Their sons, now ages 20 and 14, had attended school there and played on local sports teams. However, no matter how deep they dug, there was nothing that pointed them towards solving the case. That is, until April 10, 1996, when something eerily similar to Janie's murder occurred in San Clemente, California. A businessman named James Wingert was shot in the face in a parking garage and survived. The similarities between the 2 attacks made investigators wonder if the cases were connected. Plus, the Wingerts lived just a mile from the Carvers. When James was questioned, he walked the investigators through what happened. He said on the morning of the attack, the shooter confronted him in a parking garage and demanded his wallet. Upon looking inside and confirming it was James, the man shot James in the face. He then told investigators something that broke the case wide open. He said he was in debt to a man named Coleman Allen, and it seemed like the shooter had been hired by him. However, when they attempted to track down Allen, they learned he had died of a heart attack 2 weeks before James was shot. 10 days after the shooting, investigators received a call from an unlikely person, Coleman Allen's widow. She said that she had received a call from a man demanding payment for the hit on James, and the caller identified himself as Paul Alini. James was then shown a photo lineup and immediately picked Paul out of it. Paul was then brought in for an interrogation and accidentally revealed something that connected James's attack with the murder of Janie. He said that his boss, Coleman Allen, was furious at a man named Leonard Owen Mundy for accidentally shooting the wrong person. Investigators checked Coleman's files at Premium Commercial Services and learned that Mundy was an electrician who was in debt to Allen for $80,000, a debt that was suddenly written off shortly after Janie's murder. Once investigators had Mundy's name, he was placed in a photo lineup that was shown to multiple witnesses from Janie's case, and they all positively identified Mundy as her shooter. Turns out, Mundy's target was James Wingert's wife, but he shot Janie in a case of mistaken identity, if you can even call it that, because they looked nothing alike. It was just lazy research on Mundy's part. In May of 1996, Monday was arrested for the murder of Janie and charged with first-degree murder with the special circumstance of lying in wait and killing for financial gain. Paul was also arrested that month for the attack on James and charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and armed robbery. Paul was found guilty in May of 1997, and on July 17, 1998, he was sentenced to 29 years to life in prison. Monday was found guilty, and on July 31st, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.